Okay, great. So that will be recorded, and we'll share the recording after this session. And I also know that there are a lot of topics that people might want to get out of this, and we might have extra time. So if you have more questions or you have specific things you wanted to learn today, just put them in the chat, and then we'll get to that after we're done. Sound good? Okay. And you can still see my slides, correct?
Yes, they
Okay.
look a little bit cut off, aren't on my end. I'm not sure if it's happening for others.
Are they cut off?
Yeah.
For me as well.
Okay, let me try something different then. Let's move this over here. How about now? Is that very strange because of the tall screen?
Yes.
Okay, then we'll just roll with it like this. Or Carmen, if you want to share, that's fine too.
I think it might be like a Google slide thing because we have two things like on top of each other, actually.
I see.
But
Okay.
I'm fine with this.
All right, so we'll do it like this. It's fine. Just wanted to give you a brief introduction of who we are. So we are Cryptohunt, and we are building what we call the Duolingo for crypto, because we think that learning crypto is like learning a language. And so one term, one word at a time, you can really understand what's going on. And it's complicated, but as you'll see in a few minutes, it's actually not that complicated. If you go slowly and you take it one word at a time. And so that's what we're building. We have a website at cryptohunt.it. And you will find lessons like the ones that we have here on the slides today there, and many more, and it's free to use. So go ahead and sign up, and we'll post the link in the chat here after we're done as well. And give us any feedback you have. We always love feedback. We're a pretty young company. We just started this. We released it in June for the first time to the public, and so quite excited to get your feedback and see how you like it. So our team speaking to you today is going to be me. I'm Arndt. I am the co-founder of Cryptohunt, and I'm also the technical person behind Cryptohunt. And I've always been fascinated about financial literacy, so teaching people how to build solid knowledge with finance and invest in their future and things like that. And I think crypto is just one of those topics that has been lingering for a long time, and it's now finally breaking out. And if anything, I would love for you to take something from this is that crypto is easy to understand, and you can really get into it and make your own decisions, own smart investment decisions. So that's my goal for today. And then Carmen, maybe you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Carmen. I am the head of design at Cryptohunt. I started with Art and Christian late last year, so I'm pretty new to the industry myself. And yeah, it was a great experience and a challenging one at the same time to be sort of like designing for users who are getting onboarded, as I was getting onboarded as well. So I especially know some of those challenges, and also know that by learning little by little and in sort of a linear way, it's really possible to become an expert, as we call it in crypto. So hope you guys enjoy the platform.
Cool. And then we have a small team of people who work on this. So as I said, a very young company, but it's growing. So we're very happy about it. So one thing I want to say is this presentation is not going to be technical. It's not, you don't have to have technical understanding. That's the whole point of Cryptohunt. We want everyone to get onboarded to crypto, right? So don't worry about that. And so what I'm going to talk about today is 4 very short lessons. Like, why was crypto invented in the first place? So you have a little bit of understanding of the history behind crypto. Then what a blockchain actually is and how it works in very fundamental terms, and what makes it so different from a regular banking system. Then we'll use the example of a family gathering and a cheating uncle to teach you about consensus, which is how blockchains agree to the version of truth, which is an essential functionality of blockchains. And then I think you cannot close out this without talking about the environment, because crypto has an impact on the environment. You've probably seen, Bitcoin in the news because it's bad for the environment. And we'll talk about why that is and why that doesn't have to be. So you kind of have an understanding of that. And it all ties together nicely. And again, if you have more questions, just put them in the chat. Happy to answer anything. So lesson number 1 is, why was crypto invented? So we'll take a little bit of a history detour here. Most of you may remember 2008. I was just starting my career at the time, came out of university, and it was a big deal, right? These banks collapsed because they had been giving bad loans to people, bad loans essentially to good people who were buying houses at inflated values. And eventually the bubble burst. And all of these banks had been sitting on these loans and were about to default. You remember there were like bankers with boxes on the street of New York and London. It was a pretty extreme picture. And in the aftermath of this, the banks collapsing and them not having enough money to save their businesses, governments came and did the thing that nobody really thought they would do. They would come in and essentially print a bunch of money to save these banks, right? And it wasn't just like a little bit of money, it was a lot of money. It was unprecedented. And you remember this in 2008, 2009. Obama had just come in and he stepped in and he printed a lot of money here. The European Union did the same. I remember very vividly in Germany, we had a bunch of banks that were bailed out by Merkel at the time. And the argument was always, they are too big to fail, meaning that if they failed and you would let them default, it would basically ripple through the system. So everything would collapse, and we're better off saving them at the cost of printing money and inflation rather than letting them default, right? And so we did, and governments did that. And some people were not very happy. Here we go. Some people were not very happy with that. And the reason is essentially because your tax money paid for those bailouts. And also the money that governments were printing in addition to that caused inflation to go up, right? There's more money in the system, then, usually inflation goes up, as you see again recently. So people were on the streets, they were protesting because essentially they thought it's unfair. The banks knew exactly what they were doing and they still got away with it. And then the businesses got saved because we thought they were too big to fail. And people were very upset about that, right? It's just unfair. And there were no consequences for bankers. They made millions, right? And so it just really showed a side of the system that people weren't happy about. And so for some reason I jumped to the bit. Hold on. My bad. I hit the wrong button. Here we go. So the idea came up in these internet forums, right? Forums that were really not very mainstream. They're like cryptography experts and, more people on the technical and mathematical side of things. And they said, like, what if we can create money that is not controlled by a bank, right? Or not controlled by government, or not controlled by someone who has a lot of influence, like a corporation or a rich person. Money that by design cannot be controlled by a single entity, right? And that's what's called a decentralized currency versus a centralized currency where, obviously banks and governments make decisions. And so the idea was just like, let's take the control from the people we don't like having control over this. And this is how Bitcoin was born. And Bitcoin was essentially a white paper. So white paper is a technical document that somebody releases for other people to comment on. And this white paper was very technical, and it talked about a decentralized currency, but in its in the way it was executed, it was very well done, right? And so people read it, and it sort of like caught people's attention, and they started talking about it. And it was released by this person called Satoshi Nakamoto. To this day, we do not know who that is. There are speculations about that, but it's an anonymous person who just released this and never really benefited from it themselves, right, financially. And so the idea was exactly that there's no banks and no governments, and it's just going to be controlled by computer code, because computer code is fair, right? It does the things that it's written to do. And that obviously creates a big question, right? Like if you have no owner or no centralized person in the system, there's no government who sets rules, There's no banks to set rules, right? Like, how do you actually make sure that things are the way that they seem? Like, how do you make sure people are not cheating? If nobody looks at that specifically, like, how do you actually make that, right? Make that happen. And so that's the history of blockchains. And let's talk about blockchains now and how that mechanism actually works. If you don't have someone like a bank or government, how do you actually make sure things are still fair? So what is a blockchain actually? If you remember this, you know, like your account statement or checkbooks that your grandpa may have used, a blockchain is really nothing other than a list of transactions. It's a history of transactions, right? It starts with like the very beginning. Person A sends something to person B, and person C sends back to A, or something like that, right? So like you write it down, you say like $300 or 300 Bitcoin was sent here, 200 here. And if you aggregate all of those, so you line them all up, it basically forms a history of everything that was ever sent to anyone, right? And you can obviously derive how much somebody has from looking at what they sent to where, right? That's all it is. Like, so if you think blockchains are complicated, they're not. This is a blockchain, right? And the reason why it's called blockchain is because if you write every single transaction together, it kind of like gets very complicated very quickly. So they get lumped into blocks. So it's just an organization. Every block has so and so many transactions, a couple of thousand in them, and then you chain them together. So one block at a time. It's just an organizational unit. That's why it's called blockchain. So nothing magical here, just a way to organize this in code, right? And that's what a blockchain is. As simple as that. So block, chain together, blockchain. But here's where it gets really interesting, right? There's no banks. There's only computers to keep a history of that balance. So in this example, you can see people paying each other, and that's kind of the history. What you see here is essentially a small blockchain. And then from who pays what, you can derive what is in people's accounts. But there's a big problem with that, right? If you have just computer code, the person who runs the computer is in a position to cheat because they have access to their computer code, right? Very simple. So if you, basically you are the bank or you're the government, if you run the one Bitcoin computer, and so you can do anything with it and just fake it and just add more money to your account. So how do you prevent that, right? And Satoshi Nakamoto thought about that obviously because that is the main problem of blockchains. So that's why we don't have one computer in Bitcoin or any other blockchain. We have many. They're called nodes, and they're all run by someone else. So it's basically giving the power of validation to the people. And while that's not entirely true anymore for Bitcoin, that is basically the idea, right? So there are probably like 40,000, 50,000 nodes as of today. That's like individual computers that all do the same thing. They all look at every transaction and they say that makes sense, or this doesn't make sense. Somebody may have cheated, right? And they all contain the full history of all the transactions. So they can always go back and add everything up. And if it adds up, then they say this is fine, right? So let's say you go somewhere and pay with Bitcoin, it gets added to that, and they validate and they say they put their check mark on and say, yes, that's fine. It looks like this person had the $20 that they wanted to spend, or the 20 Bitcoin, right? So what happens is that if somebody cheats, let's say I sent Carmen 20 Bitcoin, but I never really had 20 Bitcoins in my account, right? All of these computers will look at my account history and they would say, oh, he never had 20. So they will invalidate my transaction. And because multiple of them notice, it is immediately pretty clear that I tried to cheat the system. But of course, there are complications here. And so we're just going to use this example of the cheating uncle to explain how that actually works in practice, because it is a little bit more complicated than just that. So imagine that you're at a family party, and as it is, people discuss things and they get into heated arguments, and everybody had a little bit to drink, too much to drink. And so they talk about Grandpa Mike and Grandma Judith. And suddenly your uncle comes forward and says, well, it's actually her name was Janet, not Judith. So now you're presented with two versions of the truth. How do you determine which was the right version, right? Like one person insists on Janet and the other people in the room insist on Judith. So that's essentially the problems that blockchains are solving, right? You have all these computers and they have the transaction history, and one of them may look different than all of the others because somebody tried to cheat. So how do you determine what the truth really is? Well, that's what we call consensus. And consensus is just a mechanism or method to determine which version of your history, or in this case, the family tree, is correct. All right, so you would easily say, well, obviously your uncle is lying, but you don't actually know that because he could be right. So you have to determine some sort of mechanism that says, if this is the case, then we judge it that way. And so a simple way would be, let's say we go by majority. Very simple, right? Okay, uncle is one person at the table, 9 other people disagree. So clearly it was Judith and not Jennifer. He's wrong. You could do other things though, right? Like it's totally up to you as a group to determine how you want to deal with this. So you could hire an expert, in this case, a real genealogist, so somebody who does family history, and they go in and look at all the things, and 5 weeks later they come back and says, it was actually Jennifer, not Judith, right? So that's a possibility. That's also a form of consensus, just a very different consensus. And so blockchains need this, right? Because they have the same problem. They have this family tree problem. Somebody could lie on a transaction, like your uncle did. And so they need consensus. Bitcoin does use a majority vote for consensus, which means that 50% or more of all of these 40,000 computers we just saw have to agree that their version is the correct one. So if you were to say, own 5 Bitcoin nodes and you fake a transaction, the other 40,000 would immediately disagree. They would have the majority vote and yours would be invalidated. It would be just, yeah, of course, this is wrong. And by the way, of course, it can happen that there's also something happens that's just wrong in the transaction, right? So it's not always that people are cheating, but that's what wants to be avoided here. So essentially what that leads to is that more than 50% of these computers need to have the same outcome and present that to each other. And then they all sync up and they all talk to each other through the network. And they say like, okay, so this block looks right. And then they agree and then they move on and then they come to the next block. Very simple. So, but there's a problem, right? And this is called the 51% problem. And because there's so much money in Bitcoin that people will want to cheat, right? And Satoshi Nakamoto, he saw this problem coming. If ever Bitcoin were to be valuable, people would obviously try everything to get their hands on the money, right? And the problem here is like, okay, so I have 4 computers, I can't do much, but what if I have more than 4, right? If I have 50% of the computers, then I suddenly create a reality that I can determine. And it's very easy to do this today, right? Because you can just go to Amazon and if you're rich enough, rent, 40,000 computers from Amazon. They have them sitting in servers and, data warehouses and stuff. It shouldn't be that big of a problem. And even in 2009, when Bitcoin was created, that was a real concern, right? So that's kind of the same as your uncle at the table, either bribing everyone or bringing in, 40 people who also support his fake version of the truth. And so this leads us to the reason why Bitcoin is actually really bad for the planet. And also what other methods there are, we'll talk about that as well. But if you think about this, and it's actually called the 51% attack, mathematically not quite correct, it's just over 50%, right? But if you have 51% of all the Bitcoin nodes, because you can afford to do that, you could take over the network, and from that point forward, you just determine what the truth is. You put all the money into your own accounts, right? And people might not even notice that because you can do these things anonymously. You can operate these computers just on the internet, right? So you don't have to put a name on it or anything. So Satoshi Nakamoto had a genius idea, really a genius idea. He said that, well, instead of just having people have the computers, why don't we make it financially very expensive for them to use the computers and try to take over the network? And so here's how this works. So remember, we need a majority vote to approve a Bitcoin block, right, or transaction. But people like Elon Musk, for example, they could just purchase all of the computers in the world and easily take over. I mean, if you do the math, he could actually easily get more than 40,000 computers and take over Bitcoin, right? If it wasn't for this one trick up Bitcoin's sleeve, and that's called proof of work. And it helps, it basically makes it impossible to do that. And what it does is it introduces cost. And the cost is that it has to, like, you have to solve an arbitrary problem. So, or your computer has. So every time you get to validate a transaction, you have to solve this math puzzle. And this math puzzle is very hard, and the computer cranks very hard and costs you energy, right? So it currently like takes a very decent amount of computational power to do that. And so you're spending money on energy, and now you have 40,000 computers sitting there, all doing the same at the same time, trying to take over the network, right? And that becomes really expensive. So expensive, in fact, that Elon Musk could not do it, right? Like, it's very, very hard to do that with the money he has as a single person, just to put that in perspective. So now think about this. These computers, they're all doing a random puzzle, and they're all crunching, and they're all like heating up and causing, like, you know, energy to go into the environment and things like that for basically nothing, right? Only to save Bitcoin from being taken over. So it's arbitrary work that they're doing. None of what they're doing is actually useful in itself. It's just there to create a cost barrier of entry. And so this is called mining. And the mining obviously causes environmental problems, right? Because you have these computers using that energy, and they're burning energy by design. So the solving of the puzzle consumes power, and power obviously goes into the environment. And worse than that, like, even if you create it with solar, you know, it still heats up the planet. So, and most of the time it's coal anyways, right? So, and you, like, we're burning fossil fuels basically to run these computers. And this is not only a problem if Elon Musk wants to take over. This is a problem because these computers have to do this mechanism today, because that's how they keep the blockchain true. And you might have seen this, but Bitcoin really, really sucks for the planet. So Bitcoin uses as much energy as a small country. For what, right? Like, we're not practically using it. And at Cryptohunt, we have pretty strong opinions on it. I personally don't hold any Bitcoin because I think it's, and you know, I can't do that in good conscience. But it does that because it wants to prevent people from cheating. And the mechanism it uses, proof of work, or where people work, or like where the computers work, that is the problem, right? Like, of course, we need to prevent cheating, but that's the problem. So yeah, proof of work. But there's hope. So this is not the only thing that we can do. And as things have evolved from Bitcoin to other blockchains, there are blockchains that don't need these crazy killer puzzles to create punishment or negative incentive for taking over a network, right? And there's a thing called proof of stake now, that Ethereum, for example, is moving to other blockchains like Celo or Solana. They're using some sort of version of that. And instead of you having to burn energy to participate in the process as a miner, you put money into an escrow account, so crypto money. And if you happen to be a cheater and people find out, then the network will take that money from you, and you essentially lose financial, you know, like real money, like finances, and that goes and gets distributed to the other people who are mining. And so this process, in my opinion, is not perfect, but it is definitely a better approach because it doesn't create arbitrary computation. It only needs the computers to do what they need to do, and let's check that the blockchain is correct. And then when cheating happens, the punishment happens in a different way than, you know, causing huge amounts of energy to be used. Yeah, and so there are a lot of blockchains, like I said, that use this. Bitcoin will very likely never move to that because there's a high incentive for people who are mining to never want to change Bitcoin because they bought all this equipment, right? They buy like these specialized computers, they put them in warehouses and so on. But it's really something to consider if you're starting to invest in blockchains. And that's called a consensus algorithm. It's proof of work for Bitcoin, proof of stake for others. In the future, we'll probably see other ways to punish cheaters in blockchains. But one thing to note is also that if you don't need to do all of these puzzles here, blockchains, like for example, you see like Avalanche here, Celo, Agrand, Solana, right? So these blockchains that use these faster mechanisms are also able to process much more in terms of transactions. So today, Bitcoin can only process 7 transactions per second. If you think about that, like if you have a great, like, you know, good, like a well-run supermarket, that might actually do 7 transactions per second, just one. So it's very slow. Transactions are very fast. So even for practical reasons, the process of proof of work isn't really working. And many blockchains are working on improving that, because if we want to get to a world where we truly use blockchains for everyday things like payments and other stuff, it'll be, you know, we'll have like thousands or even millions of transactions per second, like Visa or MasterCards do. And I think that's it from me. So let me just go into the comments here, see what questions we got. Okay, first one. Why is it always the uncle? Don't know, but it always is the uncle. Somebody said, watch The Big Short on Netflix. That's a great movie that explains the financial crisis very well. Yep, agreed. So Victoria said, maybe Satoshi Nakamoto holds Bitcoin and benefits from it. Yeah, so it's very interesting. So because the blockchain is a public ledger, as they say, so public history of all transactions, you actually know with pretty high certainty which accounts belong to Satoshi. And he's never taken a single Bitcoin out of those. Right, so they're just sitting there. And he would be about the 14th richest person in the world if he or she still had access to the Bitcoins. You know, it's like tens of billions of dollars or something that are sitting in each of these accounts, and it's never touched a single one. In fact, people have written programs that keep a close eye on these accounts, because if ever someone were to withdraw even a single Bitcoin from them, we would know that Satoshi is still alive and has the keys to his fortune. And that could actually cause a ripple effect in the market, because, you know, he has so much Bitcoin that if he were to sell everything at once, the price of Bitcoin would crash most likely. And yeah, so you can read up on that. It's a very fascinating story. We have a little course on that actually that we just released. I think it's course 12 on Cryptohunt. And yeah, so he never withdrew anything. He never benefited from it, as far as we know. Maybe he, you know, borrowed against it, but it's very unlikely, right? So the person just disappeared around 2012 and hasn't really been seen again. Then Victoria says, was the consensus algorithm really Satoshi's idea? No, yeah, I misrepresented that a little bit. So Satoshi obviously didn't invent all of the things that were in the white paper. He worked with this group called the they called the crypto punks, and those people had a bunch of ideas around cryptology and things like that, and so it was probably not only his idea. Then Audrey said, would you not think of this as the digitization of energy? I think that refers to Bitcoin using proof of work. Yeah, so there's an argument. I think that's like, you know, democratizing energy usage to participate in the network. But I think the bigger point here is it uses an algorithm that artificially creates work that doesn't do anything other than create a barrier of entry, right? So we are heating up the planet to run this thing with an arbitrary puzzle, and there must be better ways to do this. Is the consensus algorithm coming to a consensus, or is it basically the how to prevent cheating part? Yeah, so it is really just about the coming to a consensus. So think about the family tree. In reality, if your uncle keeps insisting that the name was Janet and not Judith, we don't actually know, right? Like nobody has definitive proof what the name of their grandmother was. So you just have to say, if this situation ever occurs, how do we solve it? And in this case, you would probably say, okay, we'll solve it by majority vote. And so it is just coming to a consensus, right? Like, and that in itself prevents the cheating to a certain extent. But as I said, there are ways to cheat, like taking over the network and things like that, which have never happened for Bitcoin. But like consensus in itself doesn't prevent cheating entirely. Cindy asked, isn't there a fast payment option for Bitcoin via the Lightning Network? Yes, so there is. So the Lightning Network is what's called a layer 2. And this might get a little technical, so I won't go into too much depth, but people have been trying to improve on Bitcoin by adding an extra layer where things can get processed quickly and bundled up and then put back into the main blockchain. And the Lightning Network does actually help tremendously with energy usage and the speed of transactions. But I think by today's modern standards, it's still way behind other blockchains that are trying to achieve the same speeds and energy efficiency. And so Sheshi says mutually assured destruction. I do not know what that refers to. Maybe you can put that in the chat here. Audrey says he has about 1 million Bitcoins. I don't actually know what the exact amount is, but yeah, you can look it up. So he or she, we don't know, might have been female, Satoshi, does have a ton of coins, that's for sure. Do you have a simple analogy of the difference between proof of stake and consensus? Okay, so they're not the same thing. So proof of stake is a way to find consensus, right? And so is proof of work. And in this case, proof of stake finds consensus by majority vote. So all the computers will come together and vote. And if they find out that someone has not produced the same result in the group and is in the minority, they would take the money that this person who's a validator deposited from them as a punishment. So that's what proof of stake does. And just as proof of work, where you have, the barrier of entries, you have to solve the math puzzles, and then you can do the majority vote. It's also a method of consensus, if that makes sense. So then Audrey says the mining process. Audrey, maybe you can elaborate on what you mean by that. Key says, if there are 10 people who have Bitcoins, do all the computers that are crunching Bitcoin transactions have info of these 10 people? Is there duplication performed? Yes. So in the original design, every single computer holds the entire history of the blockchain. However, the way that Bitcoin was created is to infer that one block, like from basically going from one block to the next block and inferring that it is correct. You do not have to hold the entire history. It gets very technical, and there's some cryptographic aspects to it. But in theory, yes, there are tens of thousands of copies of the entire history of the Bitcoin network. And you can even download the Bitcoin client to your computer and download that history. It's like, very, very large. I don't even know, it's probably wouldn't fit on your hard drive anymore. But you can literally go back all the way to number 1. And actually transaction number 1 is called the Genesis transaction, which is the first one that Satoshi ever did. And so you can see that in there, it's all there. And that's the beauty about blockchains, because you can see the entire history. And those 10 people, like you will see what these 10 people have been doing their entire life on the blockchain. Of course, they are behind account numbers, so you wouldn't know necessarily who they are unless you can connect the dots. But yes, you can see everything. More questions? All right. Yes, so mutual assured destruction, she says, I actually didn't know this term in relation to someone trying to manipulate the block as a group. I guess, yeah, that's when people come together and they bundle their energy to do that. I think it's fair to say that for Bitcoin, if that were to happen, let's say a bunch of miners coming together, we would probably notice that at this point, and then the value of Bitcoin would plummet because we can't trust it anymore. So I don't know if that's actually a possibility that happens in real life. If I were a cheater, I don't think I would want to do that, because there's not really a point there. But it's definitely a threat, right? In proof of stake, is it also possible that cheater can escape? No. If the cheater is found out to be a cheater because they have a minority outcome that is different from the majority, then they will be found out and their money will be taken. Depending on the design, some blockchains have like a policy of like you can be wrong once or twice, right? That depends on the implementation. So Clara asks, where are the Bitcoins used to pay the notes coming from? Are all 21 million of Bitcoins already in circulation? I'll answer the second question first. So by design, Bitcoin was created to have only 21 million Bitcoins maximum. And this is a direct response to governments printing money in 2008, right? A government can print any amount of money. In fact, there's like a crazy number, like 50% of the money in circulation in the United States was printed in the last 3 years or something. And the Bitcoin inventor Satoshi didn't want that to happen. So he set a cap of 21 million. So there will never be more than 21 million Bitcoins. They're not all in circulation today. Miners get Bitcoins as a reward for mining. And so every time they add a block to the transactions, they get a fraction of a Bitcoin, or like depends. Right now it's a little bit more than a Bitcoin. And they get that. And so those Bitcoins are kind of set aside for the mining. Eventually, we'll run out of them and there will only ever be 21 million. So in a way, it can't be inflated. So where are all the Bitcoins coming from? That's a really interesting, almost philosophical question. So the Bitcoins were just made up, right? When Satoshi created the blockchain Bitcoin, it had so and so many Bitcoins ready to be there. They were distributed, and then as he started mining and others, or she and others started mining, those Bitcoins, like more Bitcoins were given to miners, so people started using it. But it's kind of like you're just inventing it, right? Like you start with a number and it just happened that it became a phenomenon and people valued them. And so it is very arbitrary. So Claire says, in proof of stake, is it possible to be punished and lose everything because of an error rather than cheating? Yes, possible. And I'm sure it has happened in blockchains that weren't very well written. For technical reasons. But I'm not aware of any major incident, but technically, I guess it's possible that it happens. Yeah. Cool. Maybe Carmen, I'll hand it over to you, and if more questions keep trickling in, we'll address those.
Cool. Yeah, I only have a couple of slides because I'll be talking mostly, but yeah, cool. Okay, yeah, so I'm gonna talk a little bit about career options in crypto, but I'm gonna sort of divide this into 4 different phases. So first, I'll talk a little bit about my own experience transitioning to a job in crypto as a newbie, and how to actually approach that career shift in the industry if you're not in the industry already. Of course, like the types of careers you can find in crypto and blockchain. And I want to finish it off, since we're a group of women here, of why it's important for women to be a part of the crypto and blockchain industry right now when it's still fairly new. So you can move forward. Yeah, so like I mentioned, I'll start a little bit with my background and experience of what personally helped me transition and adapt to a career in crypto as a beginner. Hopefully maybe some of you who are also starting with crypto and have an interest in moving to that industry can relate to the experience and find some relief knowing that, it's possible to transition into this even if you're not a crypto or blockchain expert. So yeah, so my transition was honestly pretty unexpected. It's not really something that I was looking for necessarily, but it just came at a really good moment in my career, because at that point I was ready for a change, which is really when you start becoming just curious and interested about other industries or other opportunities out there. So I actually had been working in the renewable energy industry for almost 3 years. In a company that offered clean energy and carbon offsets to households and deregulated states in the US. So it's a very niche industry and one that took me a long time to learn. So transitioning to another industry, which is also very niche and hard to learn in a very different way, was definitely challenging. But again, it was in a really good moment. So during that time, I really hadn't put like too much thought into crypto. Like many people, I'm sure here, I was introduced with it in the Bitcoin hype in 2011 when it reached like the dollar and became an achieved parity with the US dollar and then quickly rose. So, the conversation was fairly limited. There wasn't any real questions around the technology behind it or how it's going to change the world or the financial system. It was just simply, how can we make money with Bitcoin? And those were the conversations that got started essentially by the crypto bros, which was fairly intimidating at first as well. So so a few years later, it got interesting again. And that was the time where Art and Christian, our other co-founder, reached out to me to do some freelance product design work for their educational crypto platform, Cryptohunt, that they were trying to launch. So, at this point, again, like the industry was pretty intimidating. And when I began to work with them, I really wanted to convince myself that I would be, I would easily be able to catch up on what I needed to learn so that I could be successful on helping them launch this business. And then when I started this change of career in the industry, I really found that the more that I tried to learn, the more confused and the more questions I really had. So I was pretty upfront with them about the extent of my knowledge and my extent of my interest in the industry, to be frank. So, I think going into this and being able to be comfortable and just accepting of your own experience, especially as a beginner, is super important so that you can then focus on asking the right questions about why you want to be transitioning into a career in crypto. So, which takes me to the next point. So, Aaron, you can go ahead. So just to, how to approach this shift, a few lessons learned about approaching this career. So, if you're starting off, as I mentioned, again, it's not only important to accept that you're not going to fully understand everything right away. That's impossible and pretty hard, nor should you have those expectations. I think it's really okay to start that career in the industry while you're still learning. Especially if you're genuine with the team that you want to be a part of, because then at the end, like alignment is going to be super beneficial for you and for the company in the long run. So instead of trying to mimic what they want to hear, I think it's important for you to discuss like what skills you've used in the past that will actually help you transition into the Web3 space. Because a lot of these skills that we have and like what we call the Web 2 space, like are still very much applicable to the Web 3 space. So I think once you land that initial interview, it's just about showcasing your knowledge on the company, on the niche part of the industry that you want to go into, or like the crypto project. Again, instead of trying to mimic or make up your experience. So I'm really proof that anyone, regardless of gender or knowledge level, are really just capable enough to dive into crypto and find a job without understanding the technical intricacies that really come with the blockchain. And so beyond that, I think it's really important to ask yourself, why you're interested in working in crypto in the first place. What about it really intrigues you? What area of crypto are you potentially interested in? If you're looking to really make an impact in the job that you're doing or in the career that you have, how can crypto and the blockchain really help you achieve that, or companies that are working towards that? And there's many different ways to transition to a career with the Web3 space. It's, answering these questions, I think, could really help you focus on just like the specific path that you want to take within the industry. So like most people believe that working in Web3 requires like a skill set that is different from the ones that are necessary in the Web2 world. And like, yes, like while there's like new concepts and like terms, like the underlying technology is still built on something that has been existing for the past 50 years. So if you've worked in tech, or even if you hadn't, like you'll be able to handle it fine. And, I think the industry offers a lot of opportunities for people to join now, since it's still in its very like early stages. And so, and it's like starting that career in the industry is just like any other, learn the basics, read news, understand what's interesting about it, its shortcomings, And I think that will help you really gauge whether it's the right shift for you. So you can go to the next one, Arndt. Cool. So the types of career in the crypto industry, I would just divide them up by technical and not technical roles, to be honest. And there's a lot of resources out there that will really help you kind of gauge to see what the skill sets for these specific roles are. But I can mention a few, and Arndt, you can go to the next one just to show some of those roles. So the technical, of course, we have all those types of developers, right? You have like the blockchain core developer, and these are the ones that are like experienced with like cryptographic hash functions. You have like the software developer, which use like existing blockchain infrastructure to build like decentralized applications on top of it. You have front-end developers, which I'm sure it's a word that you guys are more familiar with. It's the same as like, Web2 front-end developer. You're doing basically the same thing. The only difference is that you're just doing it for a product that is based on a blockchain most of the time. You have the backend developer, which is also pretty similar to any other tech company. And this one just uses like the context of blockchain as a database. And then you have other ones that I'm sure you've heard of. I don't want to, bore you to death here, but you have Devops. It facilitates delivery of the products. UX UI designer or product designer and managers, as I am. So again, pretty self-explanatory and similar to the Web2 space. It's just, since blockchain is somewhat of a complicated thing, it's just really, really important to make sure that you're really keeping it simple, which is what I try to always think about in the platform that we created at Cryptohunt. And then you have mobile developers and QA engineers, very similar to what the Web2 space currently has. And then most interestingly, you do have a lot of other industries that can tap into the Web3 space that are not technical. You have marketers and salespeople that need to find like product market fit. You have lawyers, it's like, they're like the blockchain legal consultants. And again, like this industry is super young. And so, whether it's like heavily regulated or not regulated at all, like, of course, it's going to be really hard to navigate this whole industry with like such uncertainty. So there's a lot of, potential for these like lawyers who are going into the Web3 space. You have finance, of course, like advisors, accountants, disrupting the traditional financial world, business dev, disrupting those industries, human resources, because of course these companies are expanding. And this means that more and more people are just like, getting on board. And, all these businesses will really need like open HR departments to really scale and deal with like the massive flux of like newcomers. Okay, yes, I think those are sort of like the main ones. There's a link that I put up there, you guys, if you're interested in looking at this into more detail. And you'll be able to see that there's just like a ton of different variety of things that you can do, even if you're not a technical person per se. So, and then finally, Art, you can go to the next one. So yeah, I wanted to end with this because of course, in the context of this group, it's really important, but I think it's super important for women to be part of the industry right now. If we think about it, twice as many men as women are like buying cryptocurrency. And of course, as we know, there's like not as many women working in the blockchain and crypto industry as well. I think like in like all the sectors of like developers or investors, like people who are interested, I think it's about 4% of women who are working in the industry. And so, it's super important because we all know that we're like trying to build like the next generation of the financial ecosystem. And so, from those like point of views, it's still in its early days. And this is when like the fortunes are made. This is when like these big winners are like influencing the direction of where the industry goes. And so of course, like we want to be part of what influences that, we want to make our mark in the industry, and our absence could diminish our influence and the benefits like early on. And so, but the good news is that, of course, there's like still a ton of opportunities for us out there, especially with events like this, like, organizing meetups, like building communities, educating other women on crypto and blockchain, using social media platforms to also educate launching your own companies, writing about crypto. It can be obviously anything, but I think that's the way for us to really kind of stick together and be part of this early on, and show everyone that we also belong in the crypto space. So yeah, does anyone have any questions, any thoughts on anything? Let me check the chat. Hold on, there's a couple of things here. Sorry, I'm just going through. Hi, I just joined and I've missed the career options part. If it's not, repeat, what would you suggest for career options, including blockchain development? Okay, yeah, so in blockchain development, if you're a technical person, I mentioned that you could be sort of like the core developer, which, you know, it essentially like designs like protocols, the consensus like mechanisms, and like implements like the high level decisions that are related to the network. And I think for this, you should just be familiar with or experienced with like blockchain architecture, cryptographic hash functions, like consensus mechanism, algorithms, distributed ledger technologies, like all of these things. And then you have like the software developer where you're using like existing tools and like the infrastructure infrastructures that blockchains have to build decentralized applications on top of it. And you do this by like developing like smart contracts and deploying them on the blockchain. And then there's sort of what we know a little bit more of in the Web2 space, which are front-end developers, you know, pretty similar to what we do in the Web2 space, back-end developers as well, Devops. There's just a ton of things that you can try out for that if you like want to go into the technical part of it. And again, you know, most of it is things that we've already done before, and then just kind of trying to build your knowledge on top of it for certain things that are specific to the blockchain. Okay. Just in time. Okay, career options. Is the aim of cryptocurrency to get rid of conventional currency eventually? I think maybe for some like big dreamers out there, I don't know, Arndt. I think maybe you're a better person to answer that one.
But realistically speaking, I think the path forward is, and this is an opinion, is that we use the technology to make governments, you know, government money better, and we let government step in to help grow this technology. And so I think it's a collaboration of all sides. What we have today is like a very, very combative environment, right? Where like crypto people get looked at as anarchists by the government, they shut down things, and then you know, we don't like the government for things that they should actually be doing, like regulating or helping out when there's a crash, right? And so I think the right approach is to think of it as sort of a collaboration rather than a this versus that. You know, for example, like I have a personal experience as a crypto company in the United States, we often operate in areas that are undefined, right? So that's really bad for us because we don't know if, you know, we're doing something that's later going to be legal or not. And that obviously stifles innovation. And so having, you know, the right set of rules in place by the government is actually a good thing for us. Same with consumer protection. You might have heard that people lost a ton of money on all kinds of things, like where they invested their money in stable coins that weren't stable or something like that. The government should say, you shouldn't call this stable coin if it's not stable, right? So think of it that way. Government money is always going to be a thing, I think.
Yep, absolutely. And then Arndt, I think this next one should also be directed to you. How do people become validators?
That depends on the blockchain. It's usually a somewhat technical process because you have to create a machine or like find it like a computer and install some software. But most importantly, you have to also hold a specific amount of currency in the blockchain you want to be a validator for. And it might be cost prohibitive for some. It might be, you know, too high. But essentially, you need that money to place it into the escrow so you can start participating. That's basically the biggest barrier for most people. And again, it really depends on the blockchain. Some are easier to get into than others. But I just Googled, like, how to become a validator on, let's say, Celo or Ethereum 2 or something like that.
Yep. Great. Okay, so the next question from Ivana, could you maybe pinpoint the main differences between working Web 2 and Web 3? I really do think that depends on the sort of job that you're looking for. If you're going to the more technical aspect of the industry, becoming like a blockchain developer, I think there are a lot of specific differences with the sort of code that you're writing, the level of like knowledge, technical knowledge you need in certain areas. And so, specifically in my experience, it's been pretty similar. I think, it was just about like really trying to learn about Web3 and what its purpose was, why I cared about it, how I'm trying to like educate people to go into crypto. And so it was sort of the same challenges as I always experienced as a product designer, just, in a new industry. So I think it really does depend on what sort of job title you have. Is there?
I would
do you
add
think you
to
would,
this.
Would you add? Yeah.
Yeah. So I would add to this that the Web3 or crypto space is still so young that there's a huge amount of impact that you can have as a person, right? Like it depends on what you prefer. Do you prefer working in an environment that has established business models that make real money and generate big companies, right? Like then you should probably work for Google. If you prefer being on the bleeding edge and work on something that is yet to break out, where you have a lot of teams that create solutions that don't have an actual problem to it, right? Then I think you should work in crypto, and it is an exciting space to be in because of that, but it really depends on what your preference is here. But again, I think that the opportunity to create a career in Web3 is amazing. I mean, look at, for example, the homepage of Ethereum and tell me that you understand what they do. I don't. So, and that's the second largest blockchain, right? So you can easily see how traditional talent, like Web 2 talent, people who build companies, who know how to acquire traffic, who know how to do product marketing, are a complete lack in the space. And so this is an amazing opportunity to come in and really rock the boat, just like Carmen did for us, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And again, there's like different sectors like that you can join, like, you can work in if you do want to break into the industry, you can work for like specific like blockchain infrastructure development companies like Arne was mentioning, like Ethereum. You have like startups like that are just like smaller companies that are working on products that are based on a blockchain. Consulting companies, whether they're selling products or helping businesses tap into this like space. Big tech like Arne was mentioning, like Google, who really don't want to be left behind in like this revolution, and we can already see them working in like various blockchain projects in the last couple of years. And then you just have the financial sector, which is like the self-explanatory one because it's kind of a must for them. So it really depends where you want to tap into. So Audrey mentioned, as an educator and running classes to onboarding folks in crypto safely, why demystifying what crypto is and not. I get so many questions from all professions. So I'm not sure, Audrey, if I understand the question in itself. So why people are asking why we should demystify what crypto is and it's not. Was that your question? Yeah, if you can, just let us know, and then I'll get back to that one. Okay. So Rachel makes a good statement and a good point. She says that we should stop comparing industries to how many more men there are, because of course, especially like me coming from the tech industry, I know that it's always been male dominated, but so yeah, all industries have more men because there are more unemployed women. We should focus on empowering women and why they have to consider this industry, and not because there's a lack of women. Yes, agreed. Tatiana mentions, is there any guarantee amount of Bitcoin is fixed and can increase for some reason?
Yes, because it is set in code. And for you to change that code, you would have to own 50% or more of the Bitcoin influence or nodes. And that's very unlikely to happen. So that's why. And I don't know if it does fulfill ISO requirements.
Cool. The next question, Arndt, does Bitcoin or Ether fulfill ISO 2022 requirements?
Yeah, I don't actually even know what that is, so I can't answer that question.
Cool. Okay, let's see this third question. Okay, do you think that if Web3 wants to diversify at this stage or at a scale, they should move away from some Web2 hiring practices, or is the burden on the candidate to provide proof of experience prior to work? Honestly, I think that these Web3 companies are massively like growing, and I don't know if they can be too strict on like their hiring processes or who they hire if they don't have like enough Web3 experience. So I think it's a little bit of both. Because again, like we're just starting and most people are still getting onboarded, even the people who want to dive into the industry and work in the industry. So I don't necessarily think that they should shy away completely from the Web2 hiring practices, which can really in itself be super different from company to company or industry to industry. So Arndt and Carmen, what's the best part of your day working at Cryptohunt and in Web3 in general? Arndt, do you want to go first?
Yes. My best days are when somebody tells me that they've learned something. I had a comment from a friend who sent me a text message, said, my mom, who's 69, now knows more about crypto than I do. Good work. And that was an amazing day. That's what I want to see. If more people come to the site and they see that our classes are helping them, then I'm very happy.
And Arndt, what is the best part of working in Web3 in general?
Oh, in general, I am always excited about like everything is new, basically. A lot of people are trying to do a lot of useless stuff for sure, but it is quite exciting because there's a lot of idealism. If you sit, at a meetup with people, they're just so driven by an intrinsic motivation to change the world that you don't find in traditional industries, right? If you go and like normally like Web2 startups, everybody just wants to have an exit. That's the big deal, like have an exit and make money. In Web3, people are trying to create universal basic income or financial systems for people who don't have access to it, or create more inclusivity, or create like a permanent record of, your accomplishments, whatever that is. Those are like really cool ideas that we don't really see in Web2. So I like that a lot.
Cool. So I'll try to answer both at the same time. So, personally, like the reason why I added in part of my presentation of like really think why you want to be in this industry, that there's a lot of people there like making strong, promises of what this can be. And, personally for me, like the most interesting part of Web3 and crypto in general is just like the potential of like the decentralized like financial system, bringing financial inclusivity to everyone in the world, especially without access to financial services. So I'm originally from Venezuela, and it's a country where most people don't have access to this. And the population is also overcoming like social trust issues. And it's really given me a reason as to why I think like this shift in my career and like working in the Web3 space was positive, because it helps me and like motivates me to want to keep learning and understanding if crypto is even part of the solution to help with like economic growth for Venezuela or like other developing countries, and also continue to question the impact of the technology, right? Because it has a lot of shortcomings and it's still in its early stages. And again, a lot of people are making these big promises, specifically in like the topic of like democratization of finance and how it will change the world. And until this day, I'm not actually sure that that's a solution, but it's one that really deserves like attention and more investigation from everyone who really wants to be a part of it. And I think that's one of the reasons why Cryptohunt really clicked for me as well, because as a company, we're really all aware of like the positive impacts that crypto can make, but also want our users to like understand its downside, its implications, its limitations, so that they can really make informed decisions about the industry themselves, and their finances or anything else that they're looking to accomplish, like in their own careers in crypto. So, all right, next question comes from Victoria. Is working in a decentralized company different than a centralized company? What's the main difference? Are you getting paid in fiat? No, I'm not getting paid in fiat. I mean, the interesting thing about Cryptohunt is that we are a Web2 company trying to transition and kind of close the gap between those like Web3 companies and users to get onboarded in that. So I'm sure, I'm sure people working in specific decentralized companies have their own thing, or could be getting paid in tokens and stuff like that. I'm not sure. Do you know, Art?
Well, yeah, I mean, a lot of people in crypto get paid with crypto, and then, we operate as a regular company. We're registered in the United States. We have a regular payroll, which is how we want to operate, because you'd see this if you take our lessons. Web3 and crypto is not the answer to everything. You have to be really critical. If you want to make smart decisions about investing or your career in crypto, really think about, like, does this thing actually solve a problem, right? And does paying crypto solve a problem for us? Maybe if we find people, some would want to get paid in crypto. Does operating as a DAO solve a problem for us? Probably not. It's too complicated. So like, you have to look at things in a differentiated way to really make sense of it. And especially that's true for crypto. There's just a lot of stuff out there that doesn't make a lot of sense in my mind.
Cool. Okay, so Ivana says, thank you for your answer, but speaking about a career in Web3, because it's so new, as a junior front-end developer, have noticed that the majority of crypto companies are small startups, which are looking for senior middle devs because their teams are quite small. So maybe there are some tips in finding a job in Web3 as an unexperienced dev. Do you have any tips, specific tips, as someone who hired an unexperienced person into the space?
Well, send me an email. we may be interested in hiring you. And I would say that, generally speaking, is Reva on this call by any chance? Reva knows best on how to figure out where to find crypto companies and how to get in touch with people. And she's also on our team. Didn't mean to put you on the spot there, but if you're here. Okay, it doesn't seem like it. But yeah, so she did a really good job of just networking, right? So I think it's all about who you know, and you can easily network in the space because everybody's decentralized, so like works from home. So just go out and find the right teams. Everybody's going to need good developers. I don't know that it's only going to be experienced developers.
Absolutely. Okay, I think I don't think there's any more questions. So yeah, if anyone else has anything else, we still have a couple of minutes left. So let us know.
Hello? Hello?
Yes. Hey. Hi, Musaba. Do you have a question for us?
Really, it's to Cryptohunt businesses. I'm very interested to know how far are you going to get your audience to understand crypto intricacies. I mean, for DAOs, for example, are you focused on DAO? Are you focused on staking? What field are you focused to get your audience, your customers, to understand fully? Non-techies, that is. I'm not talking about developers. I'm talking about normal people. You want to make to understand the crypto world, but maybe not the whole crypto world, maybe specific areas. What's your focus on now? DAOs, staking, something else? What?
I think, Arn, I think you can build up on this, but just generally speaking, in a quick answer to that, we're more focused right now on sort of like that beginner content to get people to understand the industry and the space in general. As we continue, we are trying to adapt to, you know, the user journey of, you know, becoming a beginner, intermediate, and then figuring out what they want to, what their goal is, right? From crypto to learning crypto and blockchain. And that could be staking, that could be DAOs. But again, we're focused on more beginner content at the moment, and we're still fairly new. So I think that's just going to depend a lot of like on research that we conduct after we start publishing and launching some of those like beginner courses. And as we start to figure out how that transition is going to move, how our user is going to transition into being a beginner to advanced. So we'll definitely have more advanced content as we go. But I don't think we have an answer as like, you know, we're just going to be focusing on DAOs. I don't think that's our plan for now.
Yeah, check it out. I put the link in the description in the chat here, and we'll send a follow-up email. We also have a podcast that if you kind of want to get a little bit ahead of what we have out there as courses, we do have a podcast that's 1 minute a day. We teach you one little concept of crypto, kind of like this idea of learning a word every day. And that's already at 200 and I don't even know, 30 episodes maybe. So we'll send you that link as well, and that might be helpful to learn more advanced concepts.
The reason I'm asking, I'm working on a blockchain to execute business models rather than code. It's more geared towards business audience and business analysts. So you write a flow, you draw a flow using standard tools like Draw or something to describe your business process, and that's your smart contract. So I'm trying to see
I'm sorry,
what audience
maybe I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think maybe you can contact Arndt after the presentation, because we're focusing, this is a very specific question, I think.
Yeah, thank you. I guess you did answer now. You don't have a specific audience. I was trying to know what audience would benefit directly from a deep understanding of a specific field, or maybe not, and try to avoid it. So, okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, we'll put our email into the email into the follow-up, and then you can reach out.
Thank you.
All right. I think we're wrapping up. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you to everyone. And if you have any follow-up questions, I don't know if anyone here has our contact, but you know, looking forward to you guys checking out Cryptohunt and giving us any feedback that you can.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.